you know, their status or what they do or what they expect in return, but I do it because of who I am. So I really want to thank you for your time, and I hope that some of this message inspired you to continue to do the great things for people in this community as we all build community together.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Your words carry great meaning in the times we are experiencing right now. We are all in this together, and we all build community together. Today we have a premiere performance of a song. It's a great day to be a Rotarian. It's a song written by one of our own, past President Jim Irwin, and it was recently recorded virtually by the International Fellowship of Rotarian Musicians. And wouldn't you know that past President John Ackenhusen was at the helm doing this song. There are about 24 singers from Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, India, Canada, England, and the United States, including some of our best voices. Watch for them, you'll recognize their faces. And they're all singing at once. Past President Marita Holland, she coined this phrase, "It's a great day to be a Rotarian," during her presidential year. She is also singing on the video with her husband, Roger. So watch for this. Here it is, premiere performance. It's a great day to be a Rotarian. Okay, we have no audio.
Let's see what I need to do here. Can anyone see what we need to do to get, can you hear me at least?
Yes, Sarah, we can hear you.
All right.
You want me to run it, Sarah? I think I'm ready.
Well, I think I can get it if I can get my Zoom to comply here.
Yeah, unshare your screen and go back to the place and click the bottom button where it says share computer audio.
Well, now I'm stuck on a different, I'm not on speaker view now, so I can't see where that is. Let's see. Darn it.
I think I have it queued up if you want me to do it.
Go for it. If you can do it faster than me, then that's what we'll do.
Okay.
It's a great day to be a Rotarian and to join men and women like me. We all do our best to live the four-way test. It's a great day for my Rotary.
great day to be a Rotarian, and welcome to all of you. And thank you for John Ockenhusen forwarding that to us, and for all the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor members who participated there with that group. So we do have some guests here with us today, and I'm not sure of all of them actually, and I would like to welcome them to the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor. Our speaker brought in quite a few new guests. I think Beth Seifert's book club actually was going to join us. And then we also have good friends of Skip Campbell's who are also joining us. So forgive me for not naming you all. I haven't kept up with you on the 91 participants online, but you are most welcome to our Rotary Club, and we are a singing Rotary Club. Well, thank you also to the meeting, the virtual meeting coordinators. That's Lori Walters and Lauren Hainanen, John Light, Sarah Maddock, and Jim Egerdahl. I want you to know this group doesn't just work on Wednesdays. They work throughout the week to try to get the technology to be the very best for us that it can be. One thing that we found out, that redundancy is very important. Having programs and having PowerPoints and having music in redundancy helps us get through the day because one often fails because of internet access, and so we have backup. But they are doing a great job. They meet throughout the week to make sure we can deliver a meeting to you on Wednesday. Our photographer today is Fred Beutler, and our minute taker and meeting reporter is Marlena Studer. Thanks to you both. Attendance today is being done by Rob Schiff. And as you heard, we're doing an experiment to see if you can go into chat, put your name in there, and that will be our orange sheet attendance. So see if you can do that this week. As usual, a happy thing to announce are the birthdays. And Brian Mackey, our prosecuting attorney and member, is going to have a birthday on May 28th. Happy birthday, Brian. And then Jed Jacobson is May 29th, and Larry Eiler, May 31st, is having a birthday. Then June 1st, big day, Ashish Sarkar is having a birthday. And then the next day, June 2nd, is Greg Campo. Help me wish all of these Rotarians a very happy birthday. I'd like to invite now, under the announcements, Norma Sarkar to come forward. She has been so active in the Pandemic Relief Fund and so active in getting the grants out to the community. So we have some new news, Norma, huh?
We do. Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. I'm going to be brave today, and I'm going to try to screen share. So if it doesn't work, I'll go to plan B, but let's try plan A. Okay. Let me.
Let's go.
There we
plan
go. Zoom club. Share. Oh my gosh.
It worked.
It worked. Yay. Okay. So the Pandemic Response Fund, this is the final week of our campaign. I have some good news to share about our money and some excellent news to share about disbursements. So we are currently at $52,551, and Mary sent me a late breaking message that there's more, but we didn't have time to do the math. So the dollar for dollar match has been reached, so every dollar donated will be matched. Okay, let me go to slideshow here. Okay. All right, so last evening, the Disaster Response Committee met and we made some fund disbursements. So that is what I would like to share with you today. There were 4 disbursements. The first one is to SOS Community Services. They are a nonprofit located in Ypsilanti, and they were awarded $5,000. It is for their SOS food pantry. And this grant will provide groceries to 1,302 vulnerable individuals. SOS has experienced a 31% increase in demand for food since COVID. And we all know that's due to unemployment and decreased hours. And so it has exacerbated the food insecurity that we already had. The food pantry will disseminate fresh produce, shelf-stable items, dairy, eggs, and meat as available. So we are very pleased to support feeding the community through SOS. Our next grant is to Packard Health. Packard Health provides primary care to a number of people in the county, and they are receiving $5,000 for their Healthy Blood Pressure Initiative. This grant will pay for 105 home blood pressure monitoring units for 105 low-income, medically vulnerable clients. The need is that 85% of their visits are now being conducted via telehealth. They had a small number before this, but now it's even greater. So they needed more home monitoring units for blood pressure measurement. They already have procedures and protocols in place to select the patients and for the follow-up by physicians and nurse practitioners. And as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to monitor a client's blood pressure if you don't know what it is. So we're very happy to make this grant to Packard Health to improve the health of their clients. Our third disbursement was to the Peace Neighborhood Center. It is located in West Ann Arbor. The project is providing vulnerable youth with online activities and tutoring 4 days per week. The need is to provide assistance to youth to be successful in an online environment through the school year and summer program. Their service locations are the Peace Neighborhood Center on Maple, the West Arbor and Maple Meadows public housing units serve as satellite sites. So we will be assisting them to better help our youth learn through the rest of this school year and the summer. So congratulations to Peace Neighborhood Center. And finally, our fourth grant is to the Corner Health Center, located in downtown Ypsilanti. They have received $5,000 for their summer nutrition program for 50 of the clients they serve. Their clients are between the ages of 14 through 26 and include their children. The need is to increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables for vulnerable clients who rely on public transportation to secure food. So there's a couple of issues with that. One is using public transportation. The other is you can only buy what you can carry. So that becomes an issue. The program is education about healthy eating, cooking classes, and tokens for fruits and vegetables through the farmers market, which they have arranged to do online this year if necessary. So they really thought through how they could pursue this program in light of COVID-19. So our congratulations to the Corner Health Center. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the final week of the Pandemic Response Fund. We thank you to the many donors who've already contributed and made possible the support to our community. But if you have not yet donated, now is the time to support our club. The campaign ends on Sunday, May 31st. Remember, any amount is appreciated and whatever you contribute will be doubled. You can donate through our website, or you can send a check to the P.O. Box. And you can see our A2 Rotary website or go to this week's Harpoon for details. Or if all that seems too complicated, you can just call me. I'll be happy to help you out. So finally, I want to say thank you for your generosity from all the members of the Disaster Response Committee. And these are all the great Rotarians who have been working behind the scenes to make this happen. Dan Lewin as the chairperson, Mary Avocados with keeping track of our contributions, Barbara Bach, Sal Barbatano, Andrea Baer, Tim Johnson, Eric Lipson, Vic Rosenberg, Ashish Sarkar, me, Peg Talbert, and Carolyn Sanders from the IPSY Club. I also want to say a special thank you to the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor North, who made a donation of $1,000 to our efforts. So we're very appreciative of their contribution as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all very much. And don't forget, you still got time to donate. Thanks,
Oh,
Rosemary.
Norma, that's so wonderful. Congratulations to you and the Disaster Response Committee, moving quickly, moving stealthily, and making these wonderful awards. I signed the checks and they are out today, so they're on their way. Thanks so much.
Excellent.
Well, even though Memorial Day is over, Rotary is still celebrating Memorial Day. And we have really a fine speaker brought to us today by Peg Talbert. It is an honor and a pleasure to have our speaker, Skip Campbell, with us. Peg, would you introduce Dr. Campbell, please?
I would love to. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Darrell Campbell Jr. as our speaker. He is a scholar, leader, and humanitarian. Professionally, he is incredibly accomplished. His titles have included Professor Emeritus of Transplant Surgery at U of M Health, Executive Director Emeritus of the Michigan Surgical Quality Collaboration, which is a group of 70 hospitals in our region dedicated to improved safety care for patients, while also leading to cost savings in the millions for healthcare systems. He was Chief of Staff and Chief Medical Officer at U of M Health. He's received numerous honors and was designated the Henry King Ransom Professor of Surgery at U of M. But indicative of the respect that he enjoys, a professorship was endowed in his name, the Darrell A. Campbell Jr. MD Collegiate Professorship in Transplant Surgery to honor Skip's influence in clinical care, research, and medical education at Michigan Medicine. Well, these are huge accomplishments, but let me tell you a little bit about Skip the Friend. He is a true townie, having been reared in Ann Arbor. He is an avid golfer, biker, and walker. He plays the banjo and the guitar, but his proudest moments come as husband of Barb Campbell, father of Kyle and Joe Campbell, and above all, granddad extraordinaire to 4 beautiful grandchildren, Kylie, Owen, Levi, and Lucy. So it's my pleasure to Zoom this podium to Skip Campbell, who will discuss his father's surgical experiences on D-Day. Skip, welcome.
Thank you, Peg. That's actually one of my greatest attributes is to be friendly with Peg and Jim Pegs, and I count that very highly. But now I'm going to see all those things that you mentioned, Peg. I'm not sure that it includes computer science. So I'm going to put share screen right here, and I am going to find the thing that I want to share, which is right here. And okay, let's see. Now I got to go back to Zoom, I guess, because it doesn't want to let me do that. Okay, who's going to help me on this one?
Are you seeing the screen share?
I'm seeing my presentation, but I'm not seeing the other thing.
So if you find your way back to Zoom so that you can, you should
That's
have,
fine.
you probably just covered it up and it's behind your
I
presentation.
think that's probably right. Let me try that again. Okay, so now I'm back to Zoom.
Now you're just going to hit screen share and whatever is on your screen will appear.
Right, but then I'm not seeing desktop. Let's see.
At the bottom.
Let's see. Let's just go back to share screen.
John, yo.
Okay.
I'm screen sharing, but I'm not seeing my presentation. So how's that?
You can go to PowerPoint and pull up your PowerPoint app.
I'm in, but I can't get audio.
Oh, well, we can do that, but back to the meeting.
Here, let me.
I said join with without video,
I want
join
with
audio,
my,
hit
No.
audio.
what I would like to do is see my presentation, which worked fine yesterday.
You just, I saw it for a minute. It
You
came up on
did?
the screen for a minute.
For a second.
Really?
Yeah. You just need to find your way back to your PowerPoint and.
Here, I'm back to PowerPoint. I am.
Okay, so
And slideshow. Play from start.
got it.
Yeah.
There it is.
No, bravo.
Yes.
You got it?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Well,
And there.
that was the thing that I was worried about the most, but I think we've got to the good point. And Peg, again, thanks for the nice introduction. I wanted to start off by telling everybody how honored I am to be presenting to the Rotary. I remember this is not my first time. 20 or 25 years ago, I came with my father, who was a member of Rotary, and I talked a little bit about pancreas transplantation. That was a long time ago. But today I'm going to talk about himself, and it's an interesting story. I think you'll find it interesting, but I want to point out that I'm talking about him because that's the only story I really know, but I want to emphasize the point that there are literally hundreds of thousands of other people that made exactly the same
Turn it off again.
the same contribution. Are we hearing me? Is that okay? Everybody okay?
You can hear.
Okay, good. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to say that my dad was born in 1911 and he died at age 82. He trained at University of Michigan under Dr. Collar, who was a famous surgeon here. He enlisted at age 31 and married my mother, and they had a baby, Nancy, my older sister, who was 6 months at the time, and then promptly found himself in the waters of Omaha Beach, which was something he very definitely was not, thinking that he was going to be doing. And so Barb and I recently went to Normandy, actually in preparation for this kind of presentation, and we were so moved by the American Cemetery in Normandy, which has almost 10,000 American graves there. And we did visit one of a friend of her dad's, and it was just, you just get a lump in your throat when you see all these people who died for our country. And it's a totally remarkable story, and there's so many of them. Well, this is the Team 13 in the 3rd Surgical Auxiliary. My dad is on the far left. He was a major at age 31, which is pretty unusual, but then there were 2 other slightly less senior folks that are both captains, actually 3 of them, and one was an anesthesiologist, and then they had several people who helped them. But I also wanted to point out that there were a lot of women in the war effort, and they were absolutely as courageous as the men were. They were doing a little, different things, being scrub nurses and whatever, but they're right behind the front lines, getting bombed all the time. And I don't think they get as much recognition as they deserve. So this story started when my father actually didn't talk about this very much at all, hardly anything. But after he died, and a couple of years later, I was rummaging around in my mother's basement, and I found these 3 little notebooks and a big blue scrapbook. And the little notebooks had the description of over 500 cases that he had done starting on D-Day itself. And they're, really historical documents. And that was fascinating to me as a surgeon also, to see what kinds of cases he did and how they did. And the big scrapbook was made after he came back from the war. He didn't have a job, and he waited for 6 months to find a job, but he had some time on his hands. So he made the scrapbook of all the kind of memorabilia that he had. And that I got some information from that too. So here's an example of the first sort of page actually in the first book. And if you look at the top, it's hard to see. I'll use my pointer if I can. Up here, it says, with 1st Division Medical Battalion, no surgical facilities at all. Basically, he didn't have anything. And they operated on this fellow, and I won't go over the surgical details, but it was, the most rudimentary thing you can imagine, in a tent, basically, on Omaha Beach. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. this is one of the days, one of the pages from his scrapbook on June 6, 1944. He was with the 634th Clearing Company, and he came in with the engineers. That was kind of unusual. You wouldn't think the surgeons would come in first, but of course they had to, because the engineers themselves were going to have a lot of injuries. And so somebody needed to take care of them. But so they were not in the back of the, the hierarchy there. They came right in on the front, basically. So anyway, they were, one point I'll point out was he also was part of the 1st Division, which is you might have heard of this before, it's the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry, and he was supporting them. And they embarked from Weymouth Harbor, and I'll say something about that in a second. But just a little background, Operation Overlord was the big picture invasion of Normandy, but D-Day itself, June 6th and days after that, was actually referred to as Death Day, because they knew there were going to be a lot of casualties trying to come into France. Over 300,000 Allied personnel were involved. There were 9,000 casualties on D-Day, and the beach that my dad got assigned to was Omaha Beach, of one of the 5 beaches there. There were 2,400 deaths on that day in June 6, all young Americans, 1,200 in the first hour of landing. And I'll show you something a little bit more about that later. But you can imagine the carnage that happened there. People were dropping right and left, maybe 150 a minute or something, that were just dying from, German resistance. So why was the Omaha Beach was the bloodiest beach of all the 5 beaches in the D-Day invasion, but why was there a slaughter on Omaha as opposed to some of the other beaches? And the reasons were that there were very heavy German fortifications there. They kind of knew, things were going to happen. There, at the time, there was an unanticipated ocean swell, and so they ended up disembarking from these landing boats in deeper water than they had expected, and a lot of the soldiers actually drowned before they could get onto the beach. They had anticipated that there were 35 amphibious tanks and bulldozers that were going to come in and plow through all the German defenses on Omaha Beach, which in wire and all sorts of other obstacles, but 30 of those 35 sank and never made it to the beach. So there was no place for the infantry, which was supposed to follow all these amphibious vehicles. They couldn't follow them because they weren't there. And then the final thing was the air bombardment, which was supposed to protect the soldiers by bombing the fortifications just 100 yards in on these big cliffs that overlooked Omaha, basically missed. And the visibility was not good, and the pilots were so afraid of hitting their own soldiers that they ended up bombing empty cow pastures several hundred yards past the D-Day fortification. So that was a big mess. And although they had planned and planned and planned for a long time, it did not go well. So as Eisenhower, who's here as the, basically the head of the Allied Expeditionary Force, he said plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So they did have other plans to go through, which they quickly adopted, but the original plan didn't work very well. And again, Barb and I, when we went to England, we visited Whitehall, the British government, and we went down in the deep basement of Whitehall to see the planning room where Churchill and Eisenhower and all the other generals had gone over these maps in great detail. It's kind of moving to see that. So here's a map. I'm just going to review for you your geography, although I'm sure you all know it, but here's Great Britain up here, and here's the northern coast of France. And here's the English Channel going right through the middle of it. So the important point to bring here is that the Allies needed 2 deep water ports, because you're going to take, you're trying to invade Germany and go through France, you need supplies. So the deep water ports were here in Calais, which is the closest part to England, and then here in Cherbourg, which is considerably farther away. There's 2 deep water ports here, and so they basically had to try to convince the Germans that they were going to invade in Calais, and they did a great job of this by making a lot of cardboard replicas of planes and tanks and everything and putting them right in on this side of in England. But actually the plan was to go from this part of Great Britain right across the English Channel at a wider point and go into these beaches here, which I'm going to show you more pictures of that, but ultimately to get Cherbourg. But it took almost a month for them to invade and get Cherbourg where they could use that port. So it was a big, big problem. So here's another picture of the same thing basically, but here's England, and my dad was stationed in Plymouth, England, and he had been in Scotland and England for basically a year and a half preparing for this invasion. So in the end, Dad was over in England. He didn't see my mom and my sister for 4 years. He was over there for a long time, but half of it was in England preparing for the invasion. So his group basically had to come from here and then get into the middle of the English Channel on D-Day, and in this area, what they called Area Z, which is the point where all the different forces would rendezvous early up on June 6th. And so there was, I'll tell you more about that too, but they basically all got in these great big boats and were ready to invade on the 5 D-Day beaches here in France. So this is a little bit more detail of that. Dad was in the US 5 Corps, which was Omar Bradley was the general there, but he was in surgical support of the 29th Infantry Division and the 1st, the Big Red One, 1st Army Division, and they came into this part of France right here. And Barb and I walked along the beaches there to kind of get a feel for what that was really like. So these are the beaches. This is a picture I took of it. You know, it's very placid and nice looking now, but I just wanted to point out to you the big cliffs there that the Germans were on top of those cliffs shooting down. And that was a terrible disadvantage for the US troops. So a little more detail of these beaches now. And the only thing I wanted to point out on this slide was the sort of sequence of things that were intended to happen. Phase 1 was an airborne drop from midnight to 2 a.m., pitch black, obviously, and to try to get the troops behind enemy lines so they could fight from behind the Germans. At phase 2, the art of deceit, from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., they made it look like they were going to invade in Calais to get all the resources to the Calais area. The aerial attack started at about 3 a.m., and they dropped, 300 planes dropped 13,000 bombs on the German defenders. But as I said, it wasn't very effective because they missed everything. And then phase 4 was the naval attack, where the great big destroyers would get offshore and blast the Germans who were in their fortifications on D-Day. And then at phase 5 was the invasion at basically 6 a.m. when they were supposed to start. So here are the invasion beaches in Normandy. This is Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. These were the 2 American beaches. Gold and Sword were English beaches, and Juno was a Canadian beach, and I mean a Canadian supported area. So what the basic strategy was that the English and the Canadians were to take Caen, and Caen was a stronghold of Germans where they had all sorts of resources and troops and panzers and everything in Caen. It was not an easy objective. In fact, it took them almost a month to take control of Caen. But the American soldiers from Omaha and Utah were to basically get inland here and then get up through Carentan and up to Cherbourg, which is called the Cotentin Peninsula, and then take that big important point. And that, as I said, that took about a month. So this was not an easy battle, obviously. So now imagine yourself in a big balloon overlooking the beaches, and the green part is France, and the blue part is the English Channel. And these are, you know how the Army always does this. There's a dog, easy, fox, and whatever. But this part of the beaches on the right side of your screen was the dog part of the beaches. And Dad originally was supposed to go in on dog white. And then, unfortunately, as I'll show you in a minute, they had a lot of trouble with that, and they couldn't get in on dog white and had to go back on English Channel, tried dog red, tried easy green, and finally ended up somewhere in easy red area. So they were swept along from east to west by the currents and by the wind. And so they were getting shot at basically all the time. And I wouldn't be here talking about it today if you know, he hadn't had such good luck in avoiding things. So this is part of my dad's scrapbook, where he describes what he, you know, the trying to get onto dry land. He was in this LST 315. They disembarked at H plus 90 minutes, so that they got off of the LST into landing craft, which were smaller, more nimble boats. But then he got on something called a rhino ferry, and I'm going to show you what a rhino ferry is at H plus 7 hours, H plus 9 hours, H plus 10 hours, H plus 12 hours, and on these various beaches. And they finally ended up on Easy White Beach on H plus 25 hours. This is just a picture of what Omaha Beach looks like and what all the obstacles were that the Germans had put in that particular place. So when they did get in from Easy Green, they went up these things which are called rests. They're little crevices between the great big cliffs. And they initially got to this point on basically D+1 and set up a tent where they could operate. And then ultimately they made a clearing station over here, the 634th clearing station. This is what one of those clearing stations looked like. It was all tents and mud floors, and you know, you can't imagine what and not very many supplies. And so it was hard for surgical teams that were used to, you know, being much more fastidious and meticulous about sterile technique and everything. They just couldn't do it. So the moon and the tides actually made a big difference in whether this was going to be successful or not. The Air Force wanted to have a full or rising moon so they could fly. The Army wanted a high tide because then the boats could get closer to dry land and they wouldn't have to run as far under fire. The Navy wanted a low tide because they wanted to be able to see the obstacles. Well, they had to make a kind of a compromise, and they compromised. The only time they could get a full moon and the proper tide, which was a little sort of a compromise, was either June 5th or 6th or 7th, and June 5th was awful weather. And so they basically, Eisenhower, in one of the most momentous decisions ever made in the military, picked June 6th. And I just showed you some pictures here of all the different kinds of obstacles that they had here. And then they had these sand dunes, and then they had these huge cliffs that were anywhere from 100 to 170 feet up. And this is a picture of some of the shingle, they call it, rocks on the beach that the soldiers encountered when they first got there. And then this seawall, which was a huge, you know, obstacle for the soldiers to get over before they could finish their landing. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of the different kinds of ships that they used to get on dry land. This is an LST. These things are huge, and they can take out, they have a very shallow draft, so they can get in closer to shore than other boats of that size. And so they took a lot of trips, at least out in the middle of the English Channel, where they could then be loaded onto boats like this, an LCVP, which was called a landing craft personnel, basically. And they would hold about 30 soldiers each. And so they had to, you know, each LST had to unload maybe, you know, 50 or 100 different LCVPs. And it took a long time to get the soldiers in those boats. Yeah, they took 33 per ship or something like that. And then it took an hour to load all of them. And they were expecting those LCVPs to drop off the soldiers on the beach and then come back and get more soldiers, because there's lots of soldiers on the LSTs. But only 12 out of 200 actually returned within a 2-hour time period. So, and that was because of all the trouble that they experienced on the beach. And so a lot of soldiers were stuck on the LSTs and they couldn't get off. That's a picture of an LST. And this, the next one shows you what it must have been like to be a young soldier, a 20-year-old on these things. They're all seasick. They're scared to death. It's freezing cold. And they have to go into what they consider to be their certain demise. This is one of the most famous photos that it was ever taken on the DD, an LCVP landing. So Dad got on the LCVP and then transferred to a rhino ferry, which was towed in with a bunch of tanks and jeeps and also soldiers. But you can see it doesn't have hardly any power by itself, and it doesn't have any protection or armament at all. So there's sitting ducks on these rhino ferries. And this is just a picture of something that the soldiers used called a Bangalore torpedo, which actually became a very simple but very important device where they shoved hand grenades up these narrow pipes under the barbed wire and blew up the barbed wire so the troops could get through there because the tanks hadn't been able to do that. So now I'm going to show you something. It just takes a few minutes. And if any of you have weak stomachs, I would advise you not to watch this, because this is a film from Saving Private Ryan. It always made such an impression on me. So I'm just going to show you, but it gives you a good sense of what actually happened.
Clear the room! 30 seconds! Got me with you! North side stick, starboard side stick. Move fast and clear those murder holes. Once you free and deep between men. 5 men to shoot the opportunity. 1 man to waste the ammo. Stand out of your weapons. Keep those actions clear. I'll see you on the beach.
Well, it sort of gives you an idea of what they went through. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of an anecdote about myself here. This is a picture of me on Omaha Beach, as close as I could get to where I thought Dad had landed at low tide. And the medical history was I was having a little chest pain at the time, and ultimately ended up having heart surgery to fix that when we got back. But I was thinking how ironic it would be that my dad survived the greatest onslaught in modern history, and then his son, 75 years later, standing on that beach and drops dead of a heart attack. That was not something I wanted to see happen. But anyway, luckily that did not happen, and I'm fine now. So I'm not going to go into the surgical care here too much, but you can imagine it wasn't real easy. They had a certain algorithm for where patients could be taken to a collecting station and then a clearing station where they could evaluate and triage, and the non-transportables would be taken over to a field hospital or operated there. And then people who had just other kinds of problems, sort of non-threatening, life-threatening things. VD was a big one, and trench foot was another one. They went to a different kind of hospital, and then some of them went to the evacuation hospital. So they did have some kind of organization there. This is just some pictures of what it looks like in a tent. And look at this thing. Right up here is a canvas below the tent canvas, because dirt kept falling off the regular canvas of the tent onto the operative field. So they all had to put up these tents to keep, these were sterile, keep the dirt from falling in the abdominal wound, and they had to boil their own instruments and so forth. And this is a picture. I'm not sure if that's my dad or not. I couldn't really tell from this, but they're operating again. There's the the sterile tents there. So you can imagine it wasn't very easy. But now, if they couldn't, if once they were operated on and they were still alive, they could be sent back to via LST to England and hopefully, you know, taken care of there. And I'm going to move along a little bit here because I want to be on time. But I'm just going to read this one story to you because it'll be easier for you to follow. But this was written by my dad. It happened on D+3 at the 634th. I was trying to triage a fresh batch of casualties when I spotted an infantry colonel. Damnedest thing in the world, he said. We were advancing on the railroad tracks west of Bayou. The Krauts were in solid. They stopped us cold. I couldn't get my men to budge. I couldn't even get the battalion commanders to budge. I figured that we just had to get across those tracks. After all, the Army had paid me for 20 years to do just one thing. If I flunked now, I was a dud. So I blew my whistle, I shouted for the men to follow, and I jumped up. You know how far I got? 3 steps, just 3 steps. That's all I have contributed to this battle. And it took me 20 years to do that. Disgusting, isn't it? I examined him. He had been hit by 2 bullets, both in the abdomen. Within half an hour, I had him on the table. When I got in there, I could see I was in for a rough deal. Blood, pus, and corruption. I started cleaning up. And just then I heard someone shout, "Gas, what a spot to have a gas attack." I looked around. If I stopped now, the colonel was a goner. So I kept working. Then someone else shouted, "Gas." We all broke out in a cold sweat. And that's the anesthesia. Tried to be facetious about it. You know, the only fellow who is safe here is the patient. He's already got his mask on, but what about the rest of us? I still couldn't make up my mind. Then the gas alarm sounded. That was too much. After all, if I died at my post, the patient would die too. So he did not have much to lose. We just had to get out of there and get our masks. Then I had a sun-sicking spell. We had left our masks in pup tents 200 yards away. "Give me a towel," I said. I put the guts back in the abdomen, draped the towel over them. I ripped off my gloves. "Everybody get his mask," I shouted, "on the double." You should have seen us. Over the rutted field, past the motor pool, across the foxholes we dashed. It was a great sprint. Back at the operating tent, the scene became even more ludicrous. One man had brought not only his mask, but also his gas protective clothing, and he proceeded to make a complete change on the spot. Another man began to rub his face with special ointment. Someone else squatted under his gas cape. Nobody knew what to do, least of all myself. I put my gas mask on, but forgot to wipe the lenses. Then I scrubbed, got into my gloves, and returned to the litter. The colonel was just as I had left him, hadn't even stirred. I threw the towel off and tried to see. It was like looking at London through the fog. My glasses were all steamed up, and here I was with my gloves on, couldn't do anything. Well, it turned out that I had to take out 3 feet of gut. That was the hardest operation I ever did, just muddled my way through. And then as I was finishing, the CO came in deadpan and said, "Never mind, boys, somebody made a mistake." The patient, it was Colonel McKinley of the 1st Division, and he got well without a hitch. That was an interesting story in and of itself, but Colonel McKinley was actually the great-grandson of President McKinley. It's quite a story. So here's somebody, when my dad died, somebody wrote a letter to my mother and said, "Daryl really looks like something from outer space when he was doing that operation." So I'm just gonna skip over a few things. I do not want to be late. Just this last slide though, one thing that was very important was penicillin in World War II, and it had just been discovered in 1928, but only in terms of an experimental kind of drug, and they grew it in little petri dishes, and that's all they could do. Sulfa had been discovered in 35, but overused and resistance had developed, so it wasn't very effective. But Alexander Fleming had discovered it, of course, to start with, and got the Nobel Prize. But in 41, Florey, one of his colleagues, went to the US for help in mass production. He went to Peoria in a corn fermentation faculty. Pfizer began producing large quantities of it. And then in 1944, it began to be available to surgeons on D-Day, but it was an extremely important aspect of the survival for soldiers that had been wounded. So my time is up. So I am going to just stop by saying that we tend to fixate on the folks that had lost their lives in the D-Day invasion, but actually a lot of other people were wounded, not only physically, but also mentally. And I think my dad, it was a sad story because he was a terrific surgeon, a very, very good, skilled surgeon. But over time, he had a successful private practice in Ann Arbor, but he began to kind of deteriorate after 30 years of private practice and had problems with alcohol and drugs and depression. And I, to this day, think that it was a sort of a delayed PTSD, that he had kind of bottled up all this carnage for so many years. And then when he got older, he just couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. And our whole family felt this and didn't really understand it at the time. But now with more perspective, I think I do understand it a little bit better. But on Memorial Day, as just passed us a couple of days ago, I think not only do we have to think about the folks who gave their lives, but also some of the wounded and mentally wounded from going through an ordeal like that. So oh wait, I got one more slide I want to show you. This was at a football game last year. I thought it was so interesting because on the event of D-Day, oh, that didn't work. Sorry, I'm going to get that back. They had a tribute to all the folks that had been in World War II.
The Michigan Marching Band presents D-Day from the Home Front.
So that was a moving tribute, and then the final, to put a final end to that, Barb's dad, who had been a 20-year-old in the Air Force, and a bombardier navigator, had flown 20 missions over Germany during the war. He's now 96, and for fortuitous circumstances, we were able to get him honored at the Ohio State-Michigan game, and he doffed his hat in front of 120,000 fans, and they were adoring fans. And the nicest part about it, as we were walking off the field at halftime, one of the big Ohio State players came up to Kurt and said, "Thank you for your service, sir." And it was terribly moving. So I think we all try to do our best to remember these people who made such a sacrifice. And I will stop there. I'm maybe 3 minutes over.
Oh,
I would hit whatever.
Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. Remarkable presentation. You're not able to see chat, but many people are applauding you on chat and thanking you for that. I've also let people know that you will stay around for questions afterwards, if that works out for you, right? Yes, and it strikes me that the delayed trauma we will also see in the brave people who have served those in COVID-19 right now.
Yeah.
This kind of experience post-traumatic, yeah. So if you'll stay with us for questions afterwards, I'll bring it to a close. Next week, we have Judge Libby Hines, one of our own, who's coming to talk to us about how the 15th District Court is operating during the time of COVID-19. Should be an interesting presentation. I also wanted to tell you all that Dot and I went to the beaches of Normandy about 5 years ago, and it was such a very moving experience and an extraordinary time to reflect on what has been given. One of my favorite books was by Tom Brokaw, The Greatest Generation. And here's what he said when he visited Normandy. He said, "There on the beaches of Normandy, I began to reflect on the wonders of these ordinary people whose lives were laced with the markings of greatness. And they were the greatest generation." With that, and with a lot of luck, we'll ring the bell. Victory. Thank you, and have a good week, fellow Rotarians. Awesome, awesome.
Wow.
Congratulations, Skip. That was great. Thank you very much.
Best programs.
You want to say you knew your father?
Great presentation, Skip.